My ex-best friend begged me to come to her wedding, but 10 minutes after I arrived, her husband tried to kick me out, and she accused me of being a stalker. I, 30F, hadn't spoken to my former best friend Ria, 31F, in years. We didn't blow up over one dramatic betrayal. It was slower than that. She started turning every achievement into a comparison, every problem into a contest, every good thing into something she needed to one-up or frame as temporary. If I had good news, she had better. If I was stressed, she was more stressed. If I was excited, she'd find a way to poke holes in it. Eventually, I stopped responding as fast. Then I stopped responding at all. We didn't officially end anything. It just died. Then I got a wedding invitation. Not a text, not a call. A formal invite. Same day. I also got a follow request from her on Instagram after years of nothing. Mutual friends started mentioning that she was reconnecting with people and wanting everyone there. I went back and forth about ignoring it, but I didn't want to be the person everyone blamed for not showing up. I didn't want to hear that I was holding grudges or can't be happy for her. So I went, telling myself I'd show up, be polite, and leave early. Here's the part one did not expect. Her groom and I had crossed paths years ago through a short-term project. Nothing romantic, nothing secret, but it was a stressful situation that turned ugly, and it ended with tension that never got cleared up. We didn't stay in touch. We didn't even pretend to be friendly afterward. I didn't know his last name back then, and I didn't connect it until I saw it on the invitation and realized, oh, that's him. I still went, because I wasn't going to turn this into a thing before it even happened. At the wedding, everything felt stiff. Ria was in hyperhost mode, hugging me too tightly, telling people we were finally back together again, like we were some dramatic reunion story instead of two people who hadn't spoken in years. It already felt fake, but I kept my mouth shut and smiled. Then her groom walked up to me while she was busy with other people. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed, like he just remembered something unpleasant he hoped wouldn't show up. He said, very flat, "You were not supposed to be here." I said, "I didn't know it was you either. I'm not here for you." He said, "This is not the place for this." I said, "Then don't start it." He stared at me for a second, then walked away without another word. About 10 minutes later, Ria came at me already heated. She said, "What did you say to him?" I told her, "Nothing that matters. We recognized each other. That's it." She said, "You always do this. You show up and suddenly there's tension." I said, "I literally just stood here." She said, "Don't lie to my face." I told her if she was going to start accusing me, I wasn't staying for it. She said, "So you admit you came with intentions?" I said, "Your paranoia is not my responsibility." She snapped that I was selfish, that I couldn't stand her having a good moment, that I always had to make things about me. I told her she had a talent for turning nothing into a crisis just so she could feel like the victim in the center of it. She threw one more insult at me about how I always ruin things and stormed off before I could even finish responding. I left before the reception really started because I could already feel this turning into something ugly. Within an hour, my phone started lighting up. She posted a story about fake people bringing bad energy into important moments. No names, but not subtle either. Then people started messaging me asking why I caused drama and dip. I ignored it at first. Then I opened Instagram again and saw she had posted another vague quote about betrayal and loyalty, and mutuals were already liking it and commenting supportive stuff. That's when I realized this wasn't going to stay quiet. A friend messaged me saying Ria was really upset and that I should reach out because it's her wedding week and she doesn't need stress. I said I wasn't the one who created the stress. The friend told me I was being cold and that I could have just reassured her. I told her I wasn't going to babysit a grown adult who decided to accuse me instead of talk to me. Then Ria finally messaged me directly on WhatsApp. She said, "I can't believe you would do this to me on my wedding." I said, "Do what, exactly?" "Stand in a room." She said, "You know exactly what you were doing showing up when you and him have history." I said, "You invited me. I didn't crash anything." She said, "You could have declined." I said, "So now it's my fault I accepted your invitation." She said I loved causing scenes and that I always needed attention. I told her if I wanted attention, I wouldn't have left quietly while she was busy making posts about me. She said, "Don't pretend you're innocent. You looked smug when you talked to him." I said, "You are literally inventing facial expressions to justify being mad." She said I'd always been jealous of her and that this was just another way for me to insert myself. I told her she had spent our entire friendship treating everything like a competition and now she was mad that I wasn't playing along. She said, "You've always needed to feel superior." I said, "Says the person who can't stand not being the center of every situation." She told me I was bitter bitter and lonely, and that's why I couldn't just be happy for her. I told her she was insecure and trying to blame me for it instead of dealing with it. She said, everyone sees what you're doing. I said, no, everyone sees your Instagram posts and assumes you're telling the truth. She told me I should apologize to her husband for making him uncomfortable. I told her he started the interaction and that she could stop acting like I stalked my way into her life. That's when she sent a long message accusing me of holding onto old grudges, of being resentful that she moved on, of always playing the victim, and of never being supportive when she needed me. I told her she was rewriting history to avoid admitting she came at me swinging instead of asking a single calm question. While this was happening, I started getting messages from other people too. One friend told me I was petty for leaving. Another said I should have stayed and kept the peace. Someone else straight up asked me what I did to upset Rhea so badly. I told them to ask her since she was the one posting about it. Then Rhea posted again, this time something about how some people wait for your big day to make it about themselves. That's when I snapped and replied to her privately, telling her to stop turning this into a public pity performance and talk to me directly if she had something to say. She replied, why should I protect you when you clearly don't care about me? I said, I'm not asking for protection. I'm asking you to stop lying. She said, your existence there was a statement. I said, no, your reaction turned it into one. She told me I always had to be right and that's why people get tired of me. I told her she always had to be admired and that's why she couldn't handle not controlling the story. She accused me of ruining her wedding. I told her she ruined her own mood by jumping to conclusions and dragging everyone into it. Then she blocked me. A few minutes later, I found out she had also unfriended me on Facebook and removed me from Snapchat, but not before posting another vague post about finding out who your real friends are. More messages came in asking me what happened. Some were neutral, some were clearly taking her side. One person told me I should have just apologized even if I didn't mean it because it would have been easier. I told them I wasn't going to apologize for something I didn't do just to make someone feel justified in attacking me. Update 1. By the next morning, my feed was full of her wedding photos with captions about protecting your peace, cutting off bad energy, and not letting jealous people ruin your joy. In the comments, people were hyping her up and saying stuff like real friends would never do that, and some people can't stand seeing you happy. She wasn't tagging me, but she was liking comments that straight up implied I was obsessed with her husband or trying to stir something up on purpose. That's when I finally messaged her on WhatsApp and said, if you have something to say it to me, not to everyone else. She replied, I already know what kind of person you are. I'm not letting you twist this. I asked her what exactly she thought I did. She said, don't play dumb. He was upset after talking to you. I said, maybe ask him why instead of assuming it was my fault. She said, he doesn't even remember you like that. So I told her, then why did he say I wasn't supposed to be there? She didn't answer that. She skipped right over it and sent, you always have to feel important. That set me off. I told her, you invited me. If you didn't want me there, that's on you, not me. She said, I invited the person I thought you were, not this version. I said, you mean the version that doesn't let you control the narrative. She told me I was bitter, lonely, and still stuck in the past. I told her she was insecure and looking for a villain so she wouldn't have to admit she jumped to conclusions and dragged everyone into it. She said, you've always hated that people choose me. I said, no, I hated that you treat every situation like a competition you have to win. She said I was jealous of her relationship. I told her she was the only one obsessing over it and that she was talking about her own husband more in my DMs than I ever had. She called me dramatic and said I feed off chaos. I told her she feeds off attention, and now that the spotlight shifted for 5 minutes she lost her mind. While that was happening, her cousin messaged me on Facebook and said I should apologize because brides are sensitive and I should have just stayed and smiled. I replied, stop treating grown adults like fragile toddlers who can't handle reality. She said, you could have kept the peace. I said, peace isn't me standing there while I get accused of things I didn't do. She left me on read after that. Then one of Rhea's friends messaged me on Instagram saying I was messy for leaving and making it look suspicious. I told her, if you think leaving quietly is suspicious, that says more about how much you like drama than anything I did. She replied, you know what you did. I said, no, you know what you were told. She said, everyone saw the vibe shift when you showed up. I told her, yeah, because your friend decided to start whispering instead of asking a question like an adult. She told me I should have reassured Rhea instead of making it about myself. I said, funny how I'm being blamed for defending myself while she's posting quotes and fishing for sympathy. She sent back a laughing reaction and said, wow, you really don't care. I told her, I care enough not to let people rewrite me into the villain because it's convenient. Then Rhea posted again that night, another story about some people never change and you see who's real when it counts. I replied to the story and said, neither do some egos. She blocked me right after that, but that didn't stop anything, because even blocked, people kept coming at me. Mutuals started messaging asking what really happened. One person said Rhea told them I was trying to reinsert myself into her life. Another said she told people I was still mad about old stuff and took it out on her wedding. Someone else said I should just let it go because it's over now. I told one of them, it's not over if she's still posting about it and blaming me. They replied, she's emotional. It was her big day. I said, being emotional doesn't give you a free pass to accuse people. Then I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years saying, why would you even go if you had history with her husband? I said, because I was invited and I didn't think standing in a room was a crime. They said, but you knew it might cause tension. I said, so I'm supposed to predict that she's going to spiral and blame me instead of asking a question. They didn't answer after that. Meanwhile, Rhea unblocked me long enough to send one more message on WhatsApp. She said, you embarrassed me in front of everyone and now you're acting like the victim. I said, you embarrassed yourself by accusing me without facts. She said, you always twist things. I said, no, I respond when you attack. She said, you left because you couldn't handle being confronted. I said, I left because I wasn't staying to be your emotional punching bag at your own event. She said I ruined the happiest day of her life. I told her if her happiness depended on me standing there accepting blame, then that wasn't my problem. She said, you've always wanted to hurt me. I said, no, you've always wanted me to feel responsible for your feelings. She said I was heartless. I told her she was manipulative. She told me to stop contacting her. I said, you're the one who keeps messaging and posting about me. She blocked me again. Then someone sent me a screenshot of her Snapchat story where she said she was learning who can't be trusted and that some people show their true colors when they're not the center of attention anymore. No name, but everyone knew who she meant. At that point, I was done staying quiet. I messaged one of the people who kept pushing me to apologize and said, if you want the full story, ask Rhea why her husband told me I wasn't supposed to be there. Ask her why she didn't ask him what happened and went straight to blaming me. They replied, that's not what she said happened. I said, exactly. Update 2. People started forwarding me screenshots of things she was saying privately, but not in big groups. She wasn't posting publicly. She was picking people and messaging them one by one, telling slightly different versions of the story depending on who she was talking to. In some versions, I was flirting. In others, I was emotionally involved in the past. In one, I supposedly warned her that he wasn't loyal. None of that happened. Not even close. What made it worse was how confident she sounded in the messages, like she was just casually explaining something everyone already knew. Hold on tight. Before I share the full story, tap that like, subscribe, and let's talk in the comments. Would you have done the same thing? Stuff like, yeah, it's awkward because of what happened between them before, but I didn't want to make a scene at my own wedding, or I didn't expect her to react like that, but I guess some feelings never go away. I don't know what reaction she thinks I had. I spoke to him for maybe 30 seconds, about nothing, and then went back to my seat. Then her groom messaged me out of nowhere, not to ask what happened, not to clear anything up. He just wrote, you didn't have to show up and make things uncomfortable. I stared at that message for a good minute before answering. I said, you didn't have to come up to me and start talking like I did something wrong. He replied, you know there were issues back then. I said, then maybe you shouldn't act shocked when things feel awkward years later. He wrote, this wasn't the place to bring up old problems. I answered, you were the one who brought anything up. I didn't start that conversation. Then he sent, you could have just kept your distance. I snapped and wrote, I was sitting quietly. You walked over. Don't rewrite it like I chased you down. After that, nothing. He just stopped replying. Not even a read receipt. Just silence, like he'd said his piece and that was it. Then Rhea unblocked me. Not to talk, just to throw one line at me and block me again. You really couldn't stand not being part of the story, could you? I messaged back fast, because at this point I was already shaking with anger. You are literally making me the story because you won't deal with whatever is wrong between you and him. She replied, so now you're blaming my marriage. I said, no, I'm blaming your need to drag someone else into your mess. She wrote, you always had a problem when I was happy. I told her, you always had a problem not being the center of attention. Then she sent, at least people choose me. That one hit, and I won't pretend I stayed calm. I wrote back, at least I don't collect people just to feel important. She said, you sound bitter. I said, you sound desperate for validation. She told me I was cold and jealous and still holding onto old feelings. I told her she was projecting and that if she was secure, she wouldn't need to invent drama involving me. She sent, you love playing victim. I sent, you love playing storyteller. Then she blocked me again. I thought that was it. It wasn't. Later that night, her aunt messaged me. I don't even have her number saved, so when I saw the message I had to open the profile just to see who it was. She wrote that I needed to stop harassing the newlyweds and let them enjoy being married. That word, harassing, flipped something in me. I replied, I haven't contacted either of them first even once. Maybe ask why they keep messaging me. She said, you shouldn't have gone if you knew it would cause tension. I told her I didn't cause anything. I showed up, sat down, and minded my business. She wrote, people are saying otherwise. So I said, then those people are lying, and you should ask why. She sent, you're being very aggressive for someone who claims to be innocent. I snapped and wrote, I'm being aggressive because I'm tired of being blamed for something I didn't do. Then she sent, you always had a sharp tongue. I replied, and you always jump into things you don't understand. After that, she stopped replying too. By the next day, it felt like everyone had an opinion, and none of them had actually talked to me directly before deciding what kind of person I was. Friends of friends were sending me just checking in messages that were really just fishing for drama. One person asked, did you really have feelings for him before? I said, no. They replied, that's not what I heard. So I said, then you heard wrong. Another person messaged, Rhea seems really hurt. I answered, then she should stop telling lies about me. That person said, you don't have to be so defensive. I wrote back, I do when people are accusing me of things I didn't do. Then someone else sent, why didn't you just leave early if it was awkward? I finally lost patience and replied, because I was invited and I did nothing wrong. It felt like I was constantly on trial, and she was sitting somewhere narrating a story where she was calm and gracious, and I was this unstable problem that kept orbiting her life. And then Rhea did something that pushed it way further. She didn't message me. She didn't post publicly either. She started contacting people who barely even know me. Coworker level people, old acquaintances, people I haven't spoken to in years. One of them sent me screenshots where Rhea was saying things like, I didn't want to say anything, but I think she still has unresolved feelings and that's why she acted strange. And I feel bad for him because he didn't do anything to deserve that energy on his wedding day. Acted strange. I was sitting down. Another screenshot said Rhea told someone, she's always been competitive with me, even about relationships. Competitive? Over what? At that point I stopped being just angry and started being furious. I unblocked her again and messaged her directly. Stop telling people lies about me. She answered, I'm not lying. I'm explaining what happened. I said, you're inventing motives and feelings that don't exist. She wrote, you were clearly uncomfortable. I replied, being uncomfortable doesn't mean I want your husband. She sent, you don't get to decide how your behavior affected us. I wrote, and you don't get to assign intentions to me that never existed. She said, you've always hated seeing me move on. That one made me laugh out loud, and not in a nice way. I sent, you've always hated not being the only person in every conversation. She replied, you're impossible to talk to. I wrote, because I won't agree with your fake narrative. She sent, you're proving my point right now. I answered, your point is built on fiction. Then she sent, everyone sees it except you. I said, funny how everyone is people you messaged first. She told me I was embarrassing myself. I told her she was embarrassing herself dragging my name through random people's inboxes. Then she sent, maybe if you had your own life, you wouldn't be obsessed with mine. That was it for me. I wrote, you used my existence as a distraction from your own problems, and now you're mad I won't play along. She didn't respond after that, but within an hour, I started getting more messages from other people. Not supportive ones. More like, you didn't have to go that hard on her. She just got married, and she's really emotional right now. You should be more understanding, and maybe you should just apologize so this can stop. I finally replied to one of them, apologize for what? Existing in the same room. They said, for making things tense. I said, I didn't make anything tense. She did by turning me into a storyline. They replied, you're taking this too personally. I wrote, it is personal when my reputation is what she's playing with. Hold on tight. Before I share the full story, tap that like, subscribe, and let's talk in the comments. Would you have done the same thing? At this point, I was exhausted, angry, and honestly shocked at how fast someone I used to trust turned into someone who was comfortable letting other people think I was some kind of problem. And I still didn't know what she had said to her husband, because based on his message to me, he clearly thought I'd done something intentional. So now I had her husband, her aunt, and a growing list of people who barely know me all forming opinions based on whatever version of the story she felt like telling them. Update 3. Rhea sent my number to someone from the wedding and told them I owed her an explanation. explanation. That person didn't text. She called. No hello, no intro, just straight into it like I was being cross-examined. She said, "Why would you even show up if you had history with her husband?" I said, "Because I was invited, and I don't need to submit a background report to attend something I was asked to attend." She said, "That's not an answer." I said, "It is, you just don't like it." She told me I should have declined out of respect. I told her, respect goes both ways, and I didn't disrespect anyone by existing in a room. She said, "You're being defensive because you know you crossed the line." I said, "You're being aggressive because you like feeling important in someone else's mess." She snapped, "Wow, so now you're attacking me." I said, "You called me to accuse me. What did you expect? A thank you note?" She told me I had a reputation for drama. I told her if she believed everything she heard, that was her problem, not my job to fix. She said, "Ria's been crying for days because of you." I said, "Then maybe she should stop making me the center of her marriage." She hung up on me mid-sentence. 5 minutes later, Ria called. Not calm, not to talk, straight into yelling. She said, "So now you're telling people I'm lying." I said, "You are the one sending people after me like I'm a subscription service." She said, "Because you refuse to admit what you did." I said, "What I did was show up where I was invited and leave when things got weird." She said, "You always act innocent." I said, "And you always act like everyone is plotting against you when things don't go your way." She said I twist situations, that I like being the victim, that I always have to be special. I told her she has main character syndrome and loses it when life doesn't revolve around her for 5 minutes. She said, "You're just bitter because you're not the one getting married." I said, "You think a ring makes you superior and that's embarrassing." That set her off. She started shouting that I never supported her, that I was never happy for her, that I always competed with her. I yelled back that she competes with herself and blames me when she doesn't like the outcome. She said I ruined her wedding memory. I said, "You ruined your own wedding by spending it watching me instead of enjoying your husband." She called me fake. I called her obsessed. She said I was toxic. I said she was exhausting. Then she threw this at me. "He said you were always dramatic back then too." That made me snap. I told her, of course he'd say that. It's easier than admitting he handled things badly. She screamed that I was trying to sabotage her marriage. I told her her marriage wasn't my responsibility to protect, especially when she keeps dragging me into it like I'm a side character in her story. She yelled, "You just can't stand not being relevant." I yelled, "You can't stand not being worshipped." She said, "You always needed attention." I said, "You always needed an audience." Then she hung up on me. I thought that was it. It wasn't. She posted another story that night. Something like, "Some people love playing the victim even when they're the problem." Didn't tag me. Didn't have to. Everyone knew. People started messaging me again. Not asking, more like fishing. "What really happened? Did you guys fight? Why is she so upset? Did something happen with you and her husband before?" I replied to a couple and said I wasn't explaining myself anymore. If they believed her version, that was their choice. Someone sent that back to her because she immediately messaged me on WhatsApp. She said, "So you're just going to let everyone think I'm lying?" I said, "You're doing that fine on your own." She said I was acting superior. I said she was acting desperate. She said, "You always think you're better than me." I said, "No, I think you're spiraling and using me as a distraction." She said, "Wow, you really think you're some kind of victim here?" I said, "I think you're turning a wedding into a campaign against me." Then she switched tactics and said she wanted to meet and settle this face to face. I said no. She said I was scared. I said I was tired. She said I was running because I knew I couldn't lie in person. I told her I wasn't interested in performing for her. She said, "Then I'll handle it my way." I didn't answer. A few hours later, someone I barely know from her side of things sent me a long message on Instagram saying I should do the right thing and clear the air because I was making things worse by staying silent. I replied, "I didn't start this, I didn't spread anything, and I didn't contact anyone. Tell her to stop outsourcing her arguments." That person replied, "You're really cold." I said, "And you're really invested in something that doesn't involve you." Then another message came in on Snapchat from someone else asking if I was trying to break up a marriage. I said, "If I had that kind of power, I'd be using it on something more useful than this." They told me I was being sarcastic instead of accountable. I told them accountability requires an actual accusation, not rumors passed around like gossip candy. By the end of the week, it felt like I was being poked from different directions, never directly by Ria, always by people who clearly got fed some version of the story that made me look like the villain. Then Ria messaged me again. She said, "Since you won't meet me, I'll make sure people know who you really are." I told her, "You've been doing that nonstop and it hasn't made you look any calmer." She said, "You think you can just walk away and pretend none of this happened?" I said, "I think you're more focused on me than on your own marriage, and that's not my fault." She said, "You always ruin things." I said, "You ruin your own peace and blame whoever is closest." She didn't reply, but the next morning, I woke up to multiple notifications from different apps, all from different people, people, all saying some version of, "We need to talk about what you did." Update 4. I started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Not spam. Actual people. People who were at the wedding. People who apparently decided it was their job to interrogate me. One voicemail literally said, "You need to stop acting like this is some mystery and just admit you crossed the line." I didn't even call back. I texted, "Do not contact me again," and blocked the number. Then someone else messaged me on Snapchat saying, "Why are you doing this to her when she's just trying to move on with her life?" I replied, "Funny, because I was moving on with mine until she dragged me into her marriage like it was a group project." They said I was cold and heartless. I told them they were nosy and bored. Then Rhea posted a long caption about betrayal, about trusting the wrong people, about how some women don't know how to respect other women's relationships. No names, but she tagged a mutual friend who immediately started replying to comments defending her, talking about patterns and history. People who had not spoken to me in years were suddenly very comfortable having opinions. I didn't post. I didn't subtweet. I didn't make a story. I messaged Rhea directly on WhatsApp and said, "If you have something to accuse me of, say it to me instead of sending your audience." She replied within seconds, like she was waiting. She said, "You already ruined enough. I'm not letting you twist it now." I said, "You are literally building a narrative and casting me as the villain so you don't have to look at whatever actually upset him." She said, "Stop pretending you care about my marriage." I said, "I don't. I care about you using me as your emotional punching bag." She sent, "You always were jealous. Even when we were younger, you hated that people liked me. That pissed me off in a way I hadn't felt in years." I said, "You really can't stand that I don't want to compete with you anymore, can you?" She said, "You quit because you can't win." I said, "This isn't a game. You just treat people like trophies." She said, "At least I have people who show up for me." I said, "Yeah, because you recruit them into your drama like it's a team sport." Then she said, "He told me everything, by the way." I asked, "Everything about what?" She said, "About how you always needed attention, how you made things uncomfortable, how you loved stirring things up and then acting shocked when people reacted." I told her, of course he'd say that. It's convenient to make me the problem instead of admitting he still feels weird about how things ended. She sent, "You really think you're that important to him?" I said, "You really think this is about me and not about whatever you two are fighting about when no one's watching?" She sent, "You don't know anything about us." I replied, "Then stop using me as your scapegoat." That's when she dropped the message that changed the tone completely. She said, "If you had just stayed in your place and not come, none of this would have happened." I stared at that for a solid minute before replying. I said, "You invited me. You hugged me. You paraded me around like a prop and now you're mad that I didn't magically disappear when it got inconvenient." She said, "You were never supposed to matter that much." I said, "And there it is." She said, "You always want to feel significant." I said, "You always want someone else to blame." Then she sent, "You should have known better." I replied, "And you should have known I wasn't going to let you rewrite reality just because it makes your marriage feel safer." She told me to stop talking about her marriage. I told her to stop making it my problem. Then she did what she does best. She pulled in more people. Her groom messaged me again, this time not even pretending to be neutral. He said, "I don't know what your goal is, but you need to stop putting ideas in her head." I said, "Your wife is the one calling people about me. Ask her why." He said, "You always escalate things." I said, "You approached me first. You don't get to act surprised that it didn't stay polite." He said, "You could have just been supportive." I said, "Supportive of what? Exactly. Being blamed for your bad mood at your own wedding." He said, "You know what you did back then wasn't okay." I said, "And you know disappearing instead of talking about it wasn't either." He said, "This is exactly why she feels threatened by you." I said, "Then she should talk to you, not me." He replied, "You really don't take responsibility for anything, do you?" That was it for me. I said, "You don't get to paint me as the villain in your relationship issues and then lecture me about responsibility." He didn't reply after that. Instead, Rhea sent me a voice message. She was crying and yelling at the same time, telling me I ruined everything, that I embarrassed her, that people were asking questions, that I made her look stupid, that I always did this, that I never let her have anything without making it about myself. I listened to the whole thing, then sent back, "You are mad at the wrong person." She replied in all caps, telling me to stop gaslighting her. I said, "You are attacking me because it's easier than admitting your husband was already upset before I ever walked into that room." She said, "So now it's his fault." I said, "I didn't say that. I said it's not mine." She said, "You're unbelievable." I said, "So are you, but at least I'm not organizing a smear campaign over it." Then the fallout went public in a different way. Someone shared Rhea's story in their own story with a caption about homewreckers who pretend to be friends. That's when I snapped and replied publicly for the first time. I commented, "It's wild how comfortable some of you are accusing me of things that never happened just because you like the bride." That opened the floodgates. People started replying, telling me to stop being defensive, telling me to let it go, telling me I was dragging things out, telling me I should just apologize for the sake of peace. I told one person, peace built on lies isn't my job to maintain. Someone else said I was being aggressive. I replied, you came to my page to lecture me and you're shocked I'm not polite about it. Then Rhea messaged me again, furious that I commented. She said, you just proved my point. I said, no, I proved I'm not going to stay quiet while you let people trash me. She said, you always have to have the last word. I said, and you always need an audience. She told me I was blocked again, and this time she meant it. I told her, do whatever makes you feel better. A few hours later, I got one last message from her, not angry this time, just sharp. She said, I regret inviting you. I should have known you'd ruin it for me. I replied, I regret going, not because of you, but because I forgot how much you need someone else to be the problem. She didn't respond. Since then, some people have stopped talking to me. Some unfollowed. Some still watch my stories but don't say anything. A couple reached out privately saying they didn't know what to think and didn't want to be involved. Rhea stopped posting about betrayal and switched to posting about newlywed life like nothing happened. Her groom hasn't contacted me again. The end. Rhea invited you, hugged you like a long-lost sister, then flipped when her groom awkwardly confronted you about ancient work beef. She immediately decided you were there to sabotage her big day with your mere existence, so she launched a full smear campaign, vague stories, flying monkey DMs, and vented flirting accusations, crying voice notes, recruiting aunties, and randos to harass you. The works. You showed up politely, left quietly when accused, defended yourself in private until she forced your hand. Her turned your wedding into a one-woman victim Olympics while posting protect your peace captions and calling you jealous, bitter, homewrecker-coded. Groom started the tension, then blamed you for his wife's meltdown. Mutual friends just apologized to keep the peace brides are sensitive. NTA 100%. You didn't crash, didn't flirt, didn't start shit. She manufactured drama out of thin air because any second not worshiping her feels like an attack. Block the circus, live your life. You're golden. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.